The writer of Ecclesiastes observed the relentless cycles of human striving and arrived at a stark, final imperative: fear God and keep His commandments, for that is the whole duty of everyone. This absolute demand is placed on everyone. The text addresses an assumed entity, a unified, solid core of consciousness, will, and experience. But this raises a severe epistemological problem. Who exactly is the I that is supposed to hear the command, feel the fear, and execute the obedience? Secular philosophy suggests something deeply unsettling about this entity. From the perspective of radical empiricism or structural psychoanalysis, the self that feels so central to our perception may actually be an illusion. Pushing this paradox to its logical limit reveals an unexpected synthesis. This temporary, phantom construct, a bundle of perceptions alienated from its inception, is exactly the divinely orchestrated interface required for humanity to apprehend the reality of God in Christ. The deconstruction of the human subject reveals the mechanics of how a transient entity enters into and maintains a relationship with the infinite. To map this out, we start with David Hume's 18th century investigation into the human mind. He searched for an enduring, simple substance that he could point to as his true identity. He found none. Examining his consciousness, Hume stumbled only on isolated inputs: heat, cold, pain, or love. He concluded the self is merely a bundle of perceptions, succeeding with inconceivable rapidity. There is no central anchor, only a data stream. 2 centuries later, Jacques Lacan approached the unified I from a structural psychoanalytic perspective and arrived at a remarkably similar deficit. Lacan traced the origin of the ego to the mirror stage. This is the developmental moment where an infant identifies with an idealized external image of itself, granting a false sense of spatial unity that does not exist internally. The resulting identity is heavily mediated by language and social structures. The ego is a construct built entirely on a foundational misrecognition, forever alienated from whatever inaccessible core might exist beneath it. Through both empirical observation and structural psychoanalysis, the conclusion aligns. The perceivable self is not an eternal, unbroken substance. It is a fragile, highly mediated, and ultimately temporary construct. This exact fragility is recognized in the 1st century by the Apostle Paul. His letters frequently grapple with the tension between his present physical reality and his eternal calling. Paul writes that even though our outer nature is wasting away, our inner nature is being renewed day by day. This outer nature maps perfectly onto the secular models. It is the transient stream of perceptions and the constructed ego. He explicitly describes this visible, perceivable layer of identity as what can be seen, making it inherently temporary and subject to decay and momentary affliction. But Paul introduces a critical mechanism. He writes, "We have this treasure in clay jars, so that it may be clear that this extraordinary power belongs to God and not to us." Biblical theology does not deny the impermanence of the human ego. It actively relies on it, utilizing this earthly, decaying illusion as the specific container required to hold the eternal reality of Christ. If the self is merely a bundle of fleeting data or an alienated shell, a severe paradox emerges regarding moral accountability. Exactly who or what will stand before the judgment seat? The scriptural command to fear God is not a demand for blind terror, but a call for reverential awe that recognizes the infinite gulf between the Creator and the created. This specific response requires a subject, an entity capable of perceiving the gap, narrating its own anxiety, and actually experiencing the weight of a relationship. Even if the perceived I is heavily constructed by social language and sensory inputs, it remains the sole cognitive interface we have. It is the only entity capable of hearing a commandment, processing the options, and executing a choice of obedience or defiance. When Paul writes that God reconciles the world to himself through Christ, that reconciliation does not occur in a vacuum. It is experienced personally, operating entirely within the confines of this subjective, bounded reality. By centering judgment on the individual's secret deeds, The biblical framework establishes this subjective experience as the functional locus of responsibility. The perceived self provides the interface through which the individual accounts for their choices. This leads directly to the mechanism of transformation. The biblical text describes a violent internal conflict between the desires of the flesh, often termed the old self, and the active promptings of the spirit. The demands of this old self align directly with the ego's drive for self-preservation and validation, behaviors shaped entirely within Lacan's symbolic order. The Christian salvation narrative requires stripping off this old identity with its entrenched practices and putting on a new creation modeled in the image of its creator. Crucifixion demands a subject. The brittle ego shell must crack entirely, allowing the new creation to pour through. In this light, the illusory self functions exactly like a chrysalis. It is a temporary, highly expendable form that is absolutely essential for the genesis of the eternal new creation. Any human contemplation of the divine has to start somewhere, and it invariably begins within the limited framework of our individual sensory perception. The earthly self lacks the capacity to fully comprehend an infinite God. Yet this constrained bundle of experiences serves as the necessary initial lens to look upward. This limited awareness is then met, forcefully expanded, and ultimately overwhelmed by the full, saving revelation found in the person of Christ. This encounter reorients the ego's internal narrative. The native dread and localized anxieties of the I are replaced by a singular reverential awe. The spirit of cowardice inherent to a decaying, temporary vessel is transcended. In its place, the subject receives a spirit of power, anchored by grace that is made perfect precisely in the self's weakness. The vaporous, alienated self, which spends its earthly existence chasing the wind, finally discovers its true utility as the transparent construct built to hold the eternal. The illusory ego serves as the purposed stage for the human journey, where the phantom I encounters the only enduring reality, the fear of the Lord.